I always knew I was different from my brothers, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Growing up on the Riverside Ranch in Montana, Jake and Tommy seemed to have an invisible connection with Dad that I never shared. They could do no wrong in his eyes, while everything I did was scrutinized, criticized, or dismissed entirely. The ranch had been in our family for 4 generations, sprawling across 12,000 acres of prime Montana grazing land. Dad, William Carson, had built it into one of the most successful cattle operations in the state, worth over $12 million by the time I was old enough to understand what that meant. Jake, being the oldest, was groomed from birth to take over the operation. Tommy, just 2 years younger than Jake, was the natural second. Then there was me, born 3 years after Tommy, always struggling to find my place in the family hierarchy. While my brothers learned to ride before they could properly walk, I was clumsy on horseback. While they instinctively understood cattle behavior, I had to work twice as hard to achieve half their results. Dad's frustration with my shortcomings was palpable from my earliest memories. "Why can't you be more like your brothers?" was a constant refrain throughout my childhood. No matter how hard I tried, how many hours I spent practicing, how desperately I wanted his approval, I never seemed to measure up. The verbal criticism was bad enough, but it was the look in his eyes that hurt the most. When he looked at Jake and Tommy, I saw pride, love, and hope for the future. When he looked at me, I saw disappointment, frustration, and something else I couldn't identify until much later. Something that looked almost like resentment. By the time I was 16, I had stopped trying to win his approval. I focused on my studies instead, planning my escape from a place where I would never belong. The ranch might have been my birthright, but it never felt like my home. I should have realized then that there was more to the story than simple favoritism. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. The physical abuse started when I was 17, though looking back, I realized the signs had been building for years. Dad's frustration with me had been escalating, and my increasing independence seemed to trigger something dark in him. It began with accidental shoves that were too hard, grips on my arm that left bruises, and rough handling during ranch work that went beyond normal correction. Jake and Tommy either didn't notice or chose to ignore what was happening. Mom had passed away from cancer when I was 14, so there was no one to intervene. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to Montana State University with a partial scholarship, planning to study construction management. When I told Dad about my college plans, his reaction was explosive. "College is a waste of time and money," he said, his face reddening with anger. "Real men work with their hands, not their heads. You'll stay here and learn the ranch business like your brothers." "I don't want to work the ranch," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to build things, create something of my own." That's when he hit me for the first time. A backhanded slap across the face that sent me stumbling backward. The shock was worse than the pain. Jake and Tommy stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, watching but saying nothing. "You ungrateful little bastard," Dad snarled. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me? By turning your back on your family?" I touched my cheek, feeling the sting and the humiliation. "This isn't my family," I said quietly. "A real family doesn't treat each other like this." His second blow was harder, a closed fist to my stomach that doubled me over. "You'll learn respect, boy, or you'll learn it the hard way." But I was done learning anything. That night, I packed my few belongings and left Riverside Ranch forever, or so I thought. I was 18 years old, had $500 to my name, and was determined to build a life where no one could hurt me. I didn't look back as I drove away, but I could feel the weight of that place following me like a shadow. Chapter 3. Building my own life. College became my sanctuary. At Montana State, I threw myself into my studies with the same desperate intensity I had once applied to trying to win Dad's approval. The difference was that here, hard work actually paid off. My professors appreciated my dedication, my classmates respected my work ethic, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I worked construction jobs during summers and weekends to pay for school, learning the trade from the ground up. The physical work felt good after years of feeling inadequate on the ranch. Building things with my own hands gave me a sense of accomplishment that I had never experienced at home. During my junior year, I met Sarah, a nursing student with kind eyes and a gentle laugh. She was the first person I ever told about my family situation, about the abuse and the feeling of never being good enough. She listened without judgment and helped me understand that the problem wasn't with it was with Dad. "Some people are just broken," she said one evening as we walked across campus. "That doesn't mean you have to let them break you too." After graduation, I started my own construction company, specializing in custom homes and commercial buildings. The business grew steadily, and within 5 years, I was employing 20 people and had more work than I could handle. I married Sarah. We bought a house in Billings and started building the life I'd always dreamed of. For 15 years, I had minimal contact with my family. Jake called occasionally to update me on ranch business or to invite me to family gatherings that I always declined. Tommy sent Christmas cards with pictures of his growing family. Dad never reached out at all, which was fine by me. I heard through Jake that the ranch continued to prosper. Dad had expanded the operation, bought adjacent properties, and built Riverside Ranch into one of the largest cattle operations in Montana. The family business was thriving without me, which only confirmed what I had always suspected. I had never really been needed there, but blood has a way of calling you back, even when you don't want to answer. Chapter 4. The Funeral. The call came on a cold February morning. Jake's voice was strained when he told me that Dad had suffered a massive heart attack and died instantly while checking on the cattle. He was 68 years old, and despite everything between us, the news hit me harder than I expected. "The funeral is Thursday," Jake said. "I know things were complicated between you and Dad, but he was still your father. The family needs to be together right now." I hadn't set foot on Riverside Ranch in 15 years, but something compelled me to go. Maybe it was closure I was seeking, or maybe I just needed to see with my own eyes that the man who had dominated my childhood was really gone. Sarah offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to face alone. The ranch looked exactly the same as I remembered, yet somehow smaller. The house where I had grown up still sat on the hill overlooking the valley. The red barn still dominated the landscape, and the endless pastures still stretched to the horizon. But the place that had once seemed impossibly vast now felt manageable, almost quaint. Jake and Tommy greeted me at the house with awkward hugs and strange smiles. They had both grown into the men Dad had always wanted them to be. Successful ranchers with families of their own, carrying on the Carson legacy. Their wives were polite but distant, and their children stared at me with curiosity, having heard stories about the uncle who had disappeared. The funeral service was held at the small church in town, packed with neighbors, business associates, and ranch hands who had worked for Dad over the years. Person after person stood up to share memories of William Carson, his generosity, his business acumen, his dedication to the community. Listening to them talk, I wondered if they were describing the same man who had raised me. The William Carson they remembered was a pillar of the community, a loving father and grandfather, a man who had built something lasting and meaningful. But I knew a different William Carson, and his death didn't erase the scars he had left on my soul. As they lowered his casket into the frozen ground, I felt nothing but emptiness. Chapter 5. The Will Reading. 3 days after the funeral, the family gathered in the office of Harold Brennan, Dad's longtime attorney, for the reading of the will. The law office was small and cluttered, filled with the musty smell of old books and leather chairs that had seen better days. Jake sat with his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage sons. Tommy was there with his wife Lisa and their 3 young children. I sat alone at the end of the conference table, feeling like an outsider once again. Mr. Brennan was a thin, elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses who had handled the Carson family's legal affairs for over 30 years. He cleared his throat and began reading from the thick document in front of him. "I, William James Carson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament." The legal language was dense and formal, but the message was clear. Dad had left specific instructions for the distribution of his assets, which totaled just over $12 million when you included the ranch land, cattle, equipment, and various investments. Jake, as the eldest son, inherited the ranch itself, all 12,000 acres, the house, the barns, and the operational equipment. The inheritance came with the expectation that he would continue running the cattle operation and maintain the Carson family legacy. Tommy received $2 million in cash and investments, along with a smaller parcel of land where he could build his own house and start his own operation if he chose. Various smaller bequests went to longtime employees, local charities, and the church. And then there was nothing. No mention of my name, no acknowledgement of my existence, no explanation for my exclusion. It was as if I had never been born. I sat in stunned silence as Mr. Brennan finished reading. 15 years of separation hadn't prepared me for the finality of being completely written out of my father's life. Even though I had expected nothing, receiving nothing still felt like a slap in the face. Jake and Tommy looked uncomfortable, but neither of them spoke up. They had received everything they had ever wanted, and my exclusion was not their problem to solve. As the meeting concluded and everyone prepared to leave, Mr. Brennan caught my eye. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" he asked quietly. Chapter 6. The Revelation. After Jake and Tommy left with their families, Mr. Brennan closed the office door and returned to his desk. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his glasses and shuffling through papers with nervous energy. "There's something you need to know," he said finally. "Something that your father made me promise to keep secret until after his death." I waited, unsure what could possibly make this situation any worse. Mr. Brennan pulled out a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. My name was written on the front, in Dad's familiar handwriting. "He left this for you, with specific instructions that it only be given to you if you attended his funeral." I took the envelope with trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Dad's careful script, along with what looked like medical documents. "My son," the letter began, and I almost laughed at the irony. "If you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you've learned that I left you nothing in my will. Before you hate me more than you already do, you need to understand why." The letter went on to explain that when I was born, Dad had suspected I wasn't his biological child. My mother had been acting strangely during her pregnancy, and there had been whispers around town about her friendship with a traveling veterinarian who had been working at. "I ordered a paternity test when you were 6 months old," the letter The results confirmed my suspicions. "You are not my biological son." I stared at the words, reading them over and over, trying to process what they meant. The medical documents were indeed paternity test results, dated 32 years ago, clearly showing that William Carson was not my father. I should have told your mother what I knew, should have confronted her about the affair. Instead, I kept the secret and let my resentment poison our relationship. Every time I looked at you, I saw evidence of her betrayal. I know that's not fair to you, but I couldn't help it. The letter explained that Dad had struggled with whether to raise me as his own or to expose the truth. He had chosen to keep me, but had never been able to love me the way he loved Jake and Tommy. "You deserved better than the father I was to you," the letter concluded. "I hope someday you can forgive a bitter old man who let his pride destroy his relationship with an innocent child." I looked up at Mr. Brennan, who had been watching me read with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. "Did you know?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Your father told me about the paternity test years ago. He was wrestling with what to do about it." Suddenly, everything made sense. The constant criticism, the impossible standard, the physical abuse, the exclusion from the will, it all stemmed from a secret that had been eating at Dad for over 30 years. Chapter 7. The Search for I left Mr. Brennan's office in a daze, clutching the letter and paternity test results. The revelation that William Carson wasn't my biological father should have been devastating, but instead, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. Finally, I had an explanation for 33 years of feeling like I didn't belong, but the relief was quickly replaced by new questions. If William Carson wasn't my father, then who was? And did my mother's secret die with her? Or were there clues I could follow? I drove to the cemetery where both my parents were buried, hoping that standing at my mother's grave might provide some insight or inspiration. Margaret Carson had been a gentlewoman who had tried to shield me from Dad's worst behavior, but she had died when I was 14, taking her secrets with her. As I stood looking at her headstone, I tried to remember any signs of the affair Dad had described. Had there been tension between my parents that I was too young to understand? Had my mother seemed guilty or secretive about anything? The memories were hazy, filtered through the perspective of a child who had been more focused on surviving Dad's criticism than analyzing adult relationships. But I did remember the veterinarian Dad had mentioned, Dr. Michael Torres, a kind man who had treated our animals for several years when I was very young. Dr. Torres had been different from the other men who worked with Dad. He was gentler, more educated, and he had always been patient with me when I asked questions about the animals. I remembered him as one of the few adults who had ever shown me genuine kindness during my childhood. Could he be my real father? That evening, I called Jake to ask if he remembered Dr. Torres. My brother was still processing the day's events and seemed relieved to have a normal conversation. "Sure, I remember him," Jake said. "He worked with Dad for maybe 3 or 4 years when we were kids. Nice guy, really knew his stuff." "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to remember some things from when we were young," I said, not ready to share Dad's revelation with my brothers. "I think he moved to Colorado after he stopped working, started his own practice. Dad always spoke highly of." That night, I began searching online for any information about Dr. Michael Torres. It didn't take long to find him. He was still practicing veterinary medicine in Fort Collins, Colorado, and had built a successful career specializing in large animal medicine. Looking at his photo on his practice's website, I felt a jolt of recognition. He had the same dark hair I had, the same build, the same shape to his eyes. The resemblance was subtle, but unmistakable. I had found my father. Chapter 8. The Phone Call. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to call Dr. Torres. I must have picked up the phone a dozen times before finally dialing his office number. When his receptionist answered, I almost hung up. "Dr. Torres's office. This is Linda speaking." "Hi, I'm calling to speak with Dr. Torres about a personal matter. My name is David Carson." There was a pause. "Carson? Are you related to the Carson family from the Riverside Ranch in Montana?" "Yes, I am. Please hold on." The wait seemed eternal. When Dr. Torres finally came on the line, his voice was cautious, but not unfriendly. "This is Michael Torres. How can I help you?" "Dr. Torres, this is going to sound strange, but I need to ask you about something that happened over 30 years ago. You worked as a veterinarian for my family's ranch when I was very young." Another pause. "Yes, I remember the Riverside Ranch. I worked with your father for several years. I was sorry to hear about his passing. I saw the obituary online. I took a deep breath. Dr. Torres, I recently learned that William Carson may not have been my biological father. I found a paternity test that shows he wasn't, and I'm trying to figure out who my real father is. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I thought he might have. Dr. Torres? Are you still there? I'm here, he said quietly. David, this is a conversation we should have in person. Are you able to come to Colorado? You know something, don't you? I know a lot of things, but I think it would be better if we talked face to face. Can you come this weekend? I agreed to drive down to Fort Collins on Saturday. The 5-hour drive would give me time to think about what I wanted to say and what I hoped to learn. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my entire understanding of my identity was about to change again. For 33 years, I had been David Carson, the disappointing son who never measured up. Now, I was about to discover who I really was. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. Chapter 9. Meeting my father. Dr. Torres's veterinary clinic was located on the outskirts of Fort Collins, a modern facility surrounded by pastures where horses grazed peacefully. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes before finding the courage to walk inside. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, directed me to a small office behind the main clinic. Dr. Torres was waiting for me, and seeing him in person confirmed what I had suspected from his photograph. The resemblance between us was undeniable. He was in his early 60s now, with gray threading through his dark hair, but he still had the gentle demeanor I remembered from childhood. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with a nervous smile. David, you've grown up to be a fine-looking man. We sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. I've been dreading this conversation for over 30 years, he said, but I've also been hoping for. So you know why I'm here. He nodded. I suspected from the moment you called. You look just like I did at your age. He paused, studying my. David, I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and wondered how you were doing. Then why didn't you ever contact me? Dr. Torres sighed deeply. Because I made a promise to your mother that I would never interfere in your life. She was terrified that if the truth came out, it would destroy her marriage and tear apart your family. He went on to explain the affair that had led to my conception. My mother had been lonely and unhappy in her marriage to William Carson, who was already showing signs of the controlling behavior that would define their relationship. Dr. Torres had been a sympathetic ear during a difficult time, and their friendship had evolved into something. It only lasted a few months, he said. Margaret ended it when she realized she was pregnant. She was convinced that the baby was William, and I wanted to believe that too. But you suspected otherwise. You were born with a birthmark on your shoulder, the same birthmark I have. When I saw it during one of my visits to the ranch, I knew. But Margaret begged me to keep quiet, and I respected her wishes. Dr. Torres had left Montana shortly after, unable to bear watching another man raise his son. He had built a successful practice in Colorado, married a wonderful woman, and had 2 daughters, but he had never forgotten about me. I followed your progress from a distance, he said. I knew when you left for college, when you started your construction business, when you got married. I was proud of everything you accomplished, but I felt like I had no right to be part of your life. I sat quietly, absorbing this information. The man across from me was my real father, the father who had watched me from afar, who had been proud of my achievements, who had wanted to be part of my life but had stayed away out of respect for my mother's wishes. What do we do now? I asked. Chapter 10. Building a relationship. Dr. Torres, Michael, as he insisted I call him, and I spent the rest of that Saturday getting to know each other. He showed me around his clinic, introduced me to his staff, and shared stories about his life and career. In the evening, he took me to his home to meet his wife Patricia and their 2 daughters, who were both in college. Patricia was a warm, gracious woman who welcomed me without hesitation. She had known about me for years. Michael had told her the truth about his past when they got engaged. The girls, my half-sisters, were initially shy but quickly warmed up when they realized they had an older brother. I always wanted a big brother, said Emma, the younger daughter, with a grin that reminded me of my own. Over dinner, Michael shared more details about his relationship with my mother and the difficult decision to stay out of my life. He had respected her wishes, but it had cost him dearly. I missed your entire childhood, he said with obvious regret. I missed teaching you to ride, helping you with homework, being there when you needed a father's guidance. I can't get those years back, but I'd like to be part of your life now, if you'll have me. The conversation was emotional and healing in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in my life, I was sitting with a father figure who was genuinely interested in, who was proud of what I had accomplished, who didn't see me as a disappointment or burden. We talked until late into the night, sharing stories and trying to bridge the gap of 33 years. Michael told me about his work, his passion for animals, and his regrets about missing my childhood. I told him about my construction business, my marriage to Sarah, and the years of abuse I had endured from William Carson. "I'm sorry you went through that," Michael said when I finished describing my childhood. "If I had known how he was treating you, I would have found a way to intervene. Promise or no promise." "It's not your fault," I said. "You were honoring my mother's wishes. I understand why you stayed away." Before I left Colorado, Michael and I made plans to stay in regular contact. He wanted to visit Montana to see my business and meet Sarah. I wanted to bring Sarah to Colorado to meet my new family. We were both committed to building the relationship we should have had all along. As I drove back to Montana, I felt lighter than I had in years. The revelation about my parentage had initially been shocking, but it had led me to something I had never expected to find: a father who actually wanted me. Chapter 11: Sharing the Truth. When I returned home to Billings, Sarah could see immediately that something had changed. I had left for Colorado angry and confused about my father's revelation, but I had returned with a sense of peace and purpose that she hadn't seen in me for years. "You found him, didn't you?" she said as soon as I walked through the door. I told her everything about the paternity test, the letter from William Carson, my meeting with Michael Torres, and the family I had discovered in Colorado. Sarah listened with amazement and joy, especially when I described Michael's warmth and acceptance. "I'm so happy for you," she said, hugging me tightly. "You finally have the father you always deserved." The next challenge was deciding whether to tell Jake and Tommy the truth. Part of me wanted to keep the secret, to let them continue believing we were full brothers, but another part of me felt they deserved to know the truth about our family history. I decided to tell them, but I wanted to do it in person. I called Jake and asked if I could come out to the ranch to talk about something important. He agreed, though he sounded puzzled by my request. The following weekend, I drove out to Riverside Ranch for the second time in 15 years. Jake and Tommy were waiting for me in the kitchen of the main house, the same room where Dad had hit me all those years ago. "I need to tell you something about Dad's will," I began, "about why he left me out of it." I showed them the letter and paternity test results, watching their faces as they processed the information. Jake read the documents twice before looking up at me with shock and confusion. "You're not our brother?" Tommy asked. "I'm your half-brother," I corrected. "We share the same mother, but different fathers." The revelation hit them hard. They had grown up believing we were a complete family unit, and learning that their father had kept such a significant secret for over 30 years was difficult to accept. "This explains so much," Jake said finally. "The way Dad treated you, the way he always seemed angry we were around. I never understood it, but I was too young to question it." "I'm sorry," Tommy added. "We should have stood up for you more. We should have protected you. You were kids too," I said. "It wasn't your responsibility to fix Dad's problem." We talked for hours, processing the implications of this revelation for our family relationships. Despite the shock, both of my brothers made it clear that the truth about my parentage didn't change how they felt about me. "You're still our brother," Jake said firmly. "DNA doesn't change 33 years of shared history." Chapter 12: A New Chapter. Over the following months, my life took on a completely different trajectory. Michael and I developed a close relationship, talking on the phone weekly and visiting each other regularly. He came to Montana to meet Sarah and see my construction business, and I could see the pride in his eyes as he toured my projects and met my employees. "You've built something impressive here," he said as we walked through one of my job sites. "I'm proud of the man you've become, despite everything you..." Sarah and I also made several trips to Colorado, where I got to know Patricia and my half-sisters better. Emma and Sophie were bright, accomplished young women who welcomed their family with open arms. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be part of a functional, loving family. The relationship with Jake and Tommy also improved significantly. Learning the truth about my parentage had removed a barrier between us that we hadn't even realized existed. They began including me in family gatherings and ranch decisions, treating me like the brother I had always wanted to be. "We're thinking about expanding the operation," Jake told me during one visit, "adding a guest ranch component for tourists. Would you be interested in handling the construction?" It was an olive branch, an invitation to be part of the family business that had excluded me for so long. I accepted the project, and working on the ranch alongside my brothers helped heal wounds that had been festering for decades. Michael also became involved in my life in ways that William Carson never had. He attended the grand opening of the guest ranch, met my employees and friends, and even helped me with some business decisions. Having a father who was genuinely interested in my success was a new and wonderful experience. "I know I can't make up for the years I missed," Michael said during one of his visits, "but I want to be the father you deserve from now on." The construction business continued to thrive, and Sarah and I began talking seriously about starting a family of our own. The idea of being a father myself was both exciting and terrifying, but I knew I had good role models to follow. Not William Carson, but Michael Torres, who had shown me what real fatherhood looked like. As I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, I realized that learning the truth about my parentage had been the key to finally understanding myself and my place in the world. Chapter 13, Full Circle. 2 years after Dad's death, I stood in the same cemetery, where I had once felt nothing but emptiness. But this time I wasn't alone. Michael was beside me, along with Sarah, Jake, Tommy, and their families. We had come to visit both of my parents' graves. The woman who had given me life and kept a secret to protect me, and the man who had raised me, despite knowing I wasn't his biological son. The anger I had carried for so long toward William Carson had gradually transformed into something more complex, a mixture of understanding, pity, and even a grudging respect. He had been a flawed man who had let his pride and pain poison his relationship with an innocent child, but he had also chosen to raise me when he could have walked away. He did the best he could with what he knew, Michael said as we stood looking at Dad's headstone. It wasn't good enough, but it was something. I had finally been able to forgive William Carson. Not because he deserved it, but because carrying that anger was no longer serving me. The truth about my parentage had set me free from the need for his approval, and allowed me to build my own identity. Sarah and I had announced our pregnancy the month before, and the joy on Michael's face when we told him he was going to be a grandfather was something I would never forget. He was already making plans to teach his grandchild about animals and nature, to be the kind of grandfather he hadn't been able to be a father. "What are you going to name the baby?" Emma asked during our last visit to Colorado. "If it's a boy, we're thinking about Michael," Sarah said, smiling at my father. The tears in Michael's eyes told me everything I needed to know about how much that meant to him. As we left the cemetery that day, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that devastating will reading 2 years earlier. What had seemed like the ultimate rejection had actually been the beginning of my liberation. Learning that I wasn't William Carson's son had led me to discover who I really was and where I truly belonged. I had gained a father who loved me unconditionally, sisters who welcomed me with open arms, and a renewed relationship with the brothers who had always been part of my life. Most importantly, I had gained the self-respect and peace of mind that had eluded me for 33. The ranch that had once represented everything I couldn't have now felt like home again, not because I owned it, but because I finally understood my place in its history. I was David Torres, son of Michael Torres and Margaret Carson, brother to Jake and Tommy Carson, husband to Sarah, and soon to be father to a child who would grow up knowing exactly who they were and where they came from. The $12 million inheritance I had been denied turned out to be worth far less than the family I had gained. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest losses, and sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed.